The night outside was calm, but inside the Denver office, Ruby Bennett's world was ending. For 5 long years, she had built North Star MedChain with her own hands. She had kept it alive through 147 red alert nights, missing birthdays, concerts, and sleep. From her desk on the 7th floor, she could see the snowy mountains, but she barely remembered what fresh air felt like. She wasn't just a manager, she was the engine. The invisible force that made everything run when others went home. And tonight, everything she had built was being handed to someone else. "Ruby, the company needs new energy," the CEO had said, her voice coated with polite poison. "You've done amazing things, but it's time for fresh vision." Ruby had smiled because she was in a room full of people. She didn't trust her voice not to break. When the applause began for the new director, a young woman in a yellow jacket named Sloane, Ruby's hand stayed still. Her heart felt like a frozen pipe. The camera feed caught her blank face on the big screen, and for the first time, everyone saw the woman who had been carrying their world in silence. When the meeting ended, Ruby closed her laptop quietly. No one stopped her. No one even looked up. She walked out of the conference room as Sloane's voice echoed behind her, talking about new goals and listening tours. The door clicked shut, sealing 5 years of loyalty behind her. In the hallway, Ruby's reflection in the glass looked calm, but inside she was shaking. "You were never meant to be seen," she whispered to herself. "But they'll see you soon enough." She didn't yet know what that meant, only that something inside her had snapped cleanly in half. That night, her small kitchen felt too quiet. Her daughter, Kayla, was asleep in the next room, clutching her old teddy bear. Ruby sat at the table with her laptop open and a glass of untouched water beside her. The glow from the screen painted her face in blue. On it were 5 simple words: "Dear members of the executive board." She stared at them for a long time. It felt too small. Too neat. How could 5 words explain being erased? How could they explain missing your child's concert to save a dying patient you never even met? She deleted the letter and opened a hidden file instead. It was a password-protected spreadsheet, her secret map of North Star's real heart. Not the one in their system, but the one that lived through people. Ruby had every contact, every workaround, every favor she had ever pulled. The dispatcher in Wyoming who owed her one. The doctor who only trusted her updates. The warehouse owner who called her before he called his own supervisor. Line by line, Ruby saw it clearly now. "They don't have a network," she murmured. "They have me." And that realization changed everything. Ruby leaned back in her chair, the quiet hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Her mind worked like a machine switching into another gear. If she left, the system would collapse on its own. She didn't need revenge, she just needed distance. She opened a blank page and typed a title across the top: Bennett Line Logistics. It sounded strange, like a whisper of something not yet real. Beneath it, she wrote 3 rules: stay small, be honest, deliver what you promise. The opposite of everything North Star had become. For the first time in years, she smiled. The next morning, Ruby went back to work like nothing had happened. She answered emails, joined meetings, even smiled at Sloane, who walked around holding a shiny new notebook like a trophy. "If you need help understanding the routes," Ruby offered calmly, "just ask." Sloane nodded distractedly, already checking her phone. Ruby watched her walk away, her jaw tightening. "You'll ask soon enough," she muttered. That afternoon, the first system alert pinged, a shipment of children's vaccines overheating on the Albuquerque route. Ruby recognized the pattern immediately. She had warned about that route months ago. She didn't move. Her screen blinked red, showing a rising temperature. The new director had replaced Ruby's special refrigerated trucks with cheaper ones. Sloane had also ignored Ruby's custom cold chain calculation, trusting the default settings instead. It was a mistake that could ruin thousands of doses. Across the room, Sloane's voice grew louder. "Can't the driver just go faster?" She snapped into her phone. Ruby folded her arms, saying nothing. Within hours, the company lost $20,000 fixing a problem that should never have existed. The irony burned in Ruby's chest, but she kept her expression still. Let the cracks show, she thought. By the next morning, HR had sent a new email, reorganization announcement. Ruby scrolled down and froze when she saw her name. She wasn't being promoted, transferred, or fired. She was being reassigned as Legacy Process Advisor. It was a polite way of saying obsolete. A corner seat for someone they wanted to disappear quietly. Her hands trembled only once, then steadied. "So that's how it is," she whispered. That night, she typed her resignation. Short, sharp, and perfect. It ended with one line: "I am leaving quietly, precisely, and leaving a space large enough for someone to notice." The email went out at 11:04 p.m. She expected a call, an argument, a plea to stay. None came. The weekend was silent. On Monday morning, Ruby packed her things: a mug, 2 framed photos, a small plant, and placed her badge on the security desk. The guard looked up. "Last day?" he asked. "Last day," she said softly. As she stepped outside, the Denver air hit her like a clean, cold wave. For the first time in 5 years, she wasn't carrying anyone's crisis. She was free. But in that freedom, something powerful began to take shape: her comeback. 2 days later, Ruby sat at her kitchen table with a fresh notebook. On the first page, she wrote a single word in bold: rebuild. Around her, the house looked like a startup in progress: open laptops, maps, sticky notes, and coffee cups. She wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. She was thinking about creation. Kayla peeked from the hallway, her hair messy from sleep. "Mom, are you going back to work?" Ruby smiled. "Not for them," she said softly. "For us." She opened her laptop, registered her new company name, and with one click, Bennett Line Logistics was born. That same morning, her phone rang. The name on the screen made her heart jump: Dr. Harris, the hospital director from St. Bridge. "Ruby," his voice was sharp, full of frustration. "North Star failed another delivery. Can you help?" Ruby looked at her new dashboard, still half-built but ready to test. "I can," she said calmly. "But I'm not with North Star anymore." There was a pause. "Then we'll work with you," he said firmly. "Send me your new contract." Ruby hung up, her hands trembling with quiet excitement. Her first client had just found her, and she hadn't made a single call. The next 72 hours were chaos: beautiful, purposeful chaos. Ruby and her new assistant, a young logistics student named Aria, worked from the kitchen table. They barely slept, surviving on coffee and energy bars. "You're really running a whole company from this house?" Aria asked. "For now," Ruby said, eyes fixed on the screen. "Watch this." The shipment tracker beeped green. The medicine had arrived early, perfectly preserved. Aria grinned. "You did it." Ruby smiled faintly. "No, we did it." Across the city, at North Star, the same hospital was filing a complaint for late delivery. The tide had turned. Within 2 weeks, news began to spread quietly through the medical supply world. A small independent firm was outperforming North Star's multi-million-dollar network. Doctors whispered Ruby's name in conference calls. Old colleagues sent cautious messages: "You running something new?" Meanwhile, Victoria Hales, North Star's CEO, was too busy dealing with public questions about system transparency. Ruby didn't reply to any rumors. She just worked. Every night, she marked new routes with bright pins on her wall map. Kayla sat nearby drawing in crayon. "What's this one?" she asked. "That," Ruby said, pointing to a blue pin, "is our first victory." One afternoon, while Aria handled a new client call, Ruby's phone buzzed again. The caller ID froze her heart: Daniel Ruiz. The one man at North Star who had once believed in her. "Ruby," he said quietly, "we need to talk." His tone carried shame and desperation. "North Star's losing contracts. Blue Prairie just cancelled. The board's panicking. Victoria wants to make you an offer." Ruby's jaw clenched. "An offer?" "Director of Operations," he said. "Full authority. Name your price." For a moment, silence filled the air. Then Ruby answered flatly, "Daniel, I already have a company." And she hung up. Daniel's offer shook her, not because she wanted it, but because it confirmed what she already knew: North Star was cracking. That night, she stood in front of her wall of maps, hands on her hips. "They built a fortress," she murmured, "but I built the roads." Aria walked in holding 2 cups of coffee. "You think they'll survive?" she asked. Ruby took a sip and smiled faintly. "Not without the people who know where the turns are." Outside, the city lights flickered against the glass, and for the first time, Ruby felt no fear of what came next, only purpose. Days passed, and Bennett Line grew faster than Ruby imagined. New hospitals called. Former North Star clients switched sides quietly, signing small emergency contracts. This dashboard, one manager told her over a video call, finally tells the truth. Ruby just nodded. That's all I've ever sold, the truth. But the peace didn't last long. Late one evening, she received an anonymous email, a single image of North Star's executive dashboard glowing bright green. Every number looked perfect, too perfect. Ruby's stomach turned. They're lying, she whispered. They're faking their data. She closed her laptop slowly, knowing exactly who was behind it. The next morning, a text message arrived from an unknown number. Please meet me. Coffee shop, 10 a.m., Sloan. Ruby stared at the screen for a full minute. Her first instinct was to delete it, but curiosity won. At 9:55, she stood across the street watching Sloan through the cafe window. The bright blazers were gone. The girl who had replaced her looked broken, her eyes hollow, her hands trembling as she tore a napkin into pieces. Ruby finally went inside. Sloan, she said calmly, sitting across from her. If this is an apology, make it quick. Sloan looked up with tears in her eyes. You think I'm your enemy, Sloan said softly, her voice shaking. But I'm not. You were the test. Ruby frowned. The test? Sloan nodded. Victoria told me to prove you were replaceable. She wanted me to fail, to show the board that no one was indispensable. Ruby's jaw tightened. She used both of us, she whispered. Sloan nodded again, sliding a thick envelope across the table. This is every email, every instruction she gave me, how she faked numbers, ignored your safety warnings, and built ghost contracts. I'm sending a copy to the regulators, but you should have one too. Ruby looked at the envelope for a long moment before picking it up. Why give this to me? She asked quietly. Sloane's eyes were red but clear. Because she'll come after you next, she said. And when she does, you'll need proof. Ruby didn't thank her. She just stood, tucking the envelope into her coat. You were right about one thing, Ruby said, turning to leave. No one can replace me. She walked out into the cold Denver air, her hands shaking not from fear, but from power. Inside her bag was the end of a queen's empire. That night, Ruby didn't go home right away. She drove through the dark streets until she found herself parked outside a small neighborhood bank. Inside, she rented a safety deposit box and placed Sloane's envelope inside it. The evidence was too dangerous to destroy, and too powerful to use yet. When she got home, Arya was asleep on the couch, her laptop still open. Ruby covered her with a blanket and sat down at the kitchen table. We don't need revenge, she whispered to herself. We just need to stay standing when their tower falls. It was already starting to tilt. 2 weeks later, the tower finally cracked. The Department of Health announced a formal investigation into North Star's contracts, citing serious reporting irregularities. The company froze shipments to review their data. Hospitals were suddenly without supplies. Ruby's phone buzzed nonstop, not with gossip, but with pleas for help. Ruby, our oxygen tanks are late. We're out of vaccines. Can you route a shipment? She stared at her small kitchen, at Arya typing furiously on her laptop. We're not big enough, Arya said. No, Ruby replied, tying her hair back. But we're smart enough. That night, Bennett Line went to war. They turned the kitchen into a command center. The walls were covered with maps, sticky notes, and live data feeds. Arya worked the coding terminal, Ruby coordinated the drivers. Forget the paperwork, Ruby barked. Just move the boxes. She called every contact she'd ever made, dispatchers, drivers, night supervisors, anyone who still trusted her. By sunrise, the first hospital reported that Bennett Line deliveries had arrived on time. Arya looked up, exhausted but grinning. We actually did it, she said. Ruby nodded slowly, her voice calm but trembling. We're holding up what a billion-dollar company just dropped. The next morning, headlines exploded, North Star suspended from federal contracts. Ruby read them in silence. The same woman who had once been invisible was now the name whispered in boardrooms. That afternoon, She received a call from a polished voice representing the interim North Star board. Ms. Bennett, the company would like to contract Bennett Line as an emergency partner to stabilize operations. Ruby listened, her expression unreadable. You can have me, she said coolly, but on my terms. Full transparency. No secrets. No NDAs. And every file stays open to the regulators. There was a pause. Then came the word she expected: we agree. It was victory, but not peace. 2 days later, North Star's lawyers sent her a cease and desist notice, accusing her of stealing trade secrets. Ruby didn't panic. She handed the papers to her lawyer, a sharp woman named Kara, who smiled after reading them. They really don't know when to stop, Kara said. We'll answer. The next morning, they stood before a judge. North Star claimed Ruby's dashboard was their stolen code. Ruby stayed silent while Arya opened her laptop. Your Honor, Arya said, voice steady, their system runs on an outdated framework. I built ours from open-source tools. Here's the proof. She typed fast, filling the screen with scrolling code. 2 windows appeared, North Star's old dashboard and Bennett Line's clean, live tracker. Theirs shows what the executives want to see, Arya said. Ours shows the truth. The courtroom was silent. The judge leaned forward. So, you're telling me North Star's suing the only company actually delivering medicine? Arya nodded. The judge sighed. Case dismissed. Outside, Ruby placed a hand on Arya's shoulder. You just won us our freedom. Arya smiled faintly. No, Ruby. You already won that the day you walked out. The winter wind felt lighter than it had in years. But the fight wasn't finished. 3 weeks later, the worst blizzard in a decade hit the Rockies. Highways shut down, trucks trapped, hospitals cut off. The Grand Junction ICU called in panic. Their oxygen supply was hours from running out. North Star's system was still frozen under investigation. We'll handle it, Ruby told them, her voice firm. The control room, still her kitchen, came alive again. We can't use the main route, Arya said, studying the map. I-70 is closed. Ruby's eyes narrowed. Then we'll build a new one. She pulled out her old notes, the hidden backroads she once mapped herself. 3 small cryogenic tanks of oxygen were loaded onto pickup trucks. Ruby had no big carriers now, only loyal drivers she trusted with her life. No contracts, no paperwork, she told them over the phone. Just heart. They drove through the storm, headlights cutting through the whiteout. On the screen, their GPS dots crawled across the map like tiny sparks of life. Halfway through the journey, one driver called in. Ma'am, we can't make it. The legal team pulled the plug. No coverage. Ruby's voice didn't shake. Then you're free of contracts too, she said. I'll pay you myself. Keep driving. Hours passed. The blizzard grew worse. North Star's remaining managers joined the emergency call, trying to reclaim control. This is reckless, one of them shouted. We'll handle it from here. Then another voice cut through the chaos, cold and familiar. Stop this now, said Victoria Hale. You're risking lives and liability. Ruby stared at her name flashing on the call screen. Victoria, she said, pressing the mute button. You've done enough. The silence that followed was broken by a new voice, Sloane. She's lying, Sloane said, voice trembling but strong. I have the proof. She ordered us to fake the numbers. Sloane's confession echoed through the emergency line. The regulators, the hospitals, even the press were listening. It was over. Victoria's empire had crumbled in real time. Ruby didn't celebrate, not yet. On her screen, the 3 trucks were nearing Grand Junction. The clock read 6:40 a.m. Come on, she whispered. At 6:48, a nurse called in, crying. The oxygen's flowing. We're stable. Ruby leaned back, her hands trembling. The storm outside began to calm. Arya, she said softly, we just saved them. Arya wiped her eyes and smiled. No, Ruby. You rebuilt everything they broke. Ruby finally exhaled. The fight was over. The morning light poured through the kitchen window like gold. The storm had passed, but Ruby's world felt entirely new. She sat at the table, surrounded by empty coffee cups and glowing monitors. Arya was asleep on the couch, still wearing her headset. Ruby looked at her with quiet pride. "You did good," she whispered. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a hospital or a lawyer. It was the Department of Health. "Ms. Bennett," the voice said, "we'd like to officially recognize Bennett Line as the primary logistics coordinator for the Mountain West region." Ruby smiled faintly. "Under one condition," she replied. "We stay independent." 2 weeks later, the government's final report was released. It was blunt and devastating. North Star Med Chain, permanently barred from all state and federal contracts. The name Victoria Hale appeared at the bottom, marked for investigation. The headlines called her the fallen visionary. Ruby read the report once, then folded it and slid it into a drawer. She didn't need to frame her victory. The truth was enough. Arya burst into the kitchen holding a tablet. "We made the news, Ruby. They're calling you the woman who saved the supply chain." Ruby chuckled softly. "Let them. But we know what we really did. We saved people." That evening, Ruby drove Kayla to her violin concert. The small auditorium smelled of new wood and old memories. As the children tuned their instruments, Ruby felt something she hadn't in years: peace. When Kayla spotted her in the audience, she waved, her face lighting up with joy. Ruby waved back, tears filling her eyes. The music began, soft and imperfect, but beautiful. For once, there were no phones buzzing, no red alerts, no emergencies. Just her daughter's melody filling the room. In that quiet moment, Ruby realized this was what she'd been fighting for all along. After the concert, Kayla ran into her arms. "You didn't miss it," she said, laughing. Ruby held her tightly. "Never again," she promised. As they walked to the car, Kayla looked up at her. "Mom, are you famous now?" Ruby smiled. "No, sweetheart. I'm free." When they got home, Ruby stood before the wall of maps that had guided her through every storm. The pins, the notes, the routes, they told her life story. She took one pin out at a time, setting them aside carefully. The war was over. The maps had done their job. Now it was time to live again. The next morning, her phone rang again, an unfamiliar number. "Ms. Bennett," said a calm voice, "this is the interim North Star Board. We'd like to formally apologize for how you were treated." Ruby listened quietly, the sound of coffee pouring in the background. "We've dissolved Victoria's leadership entirely," the man continued. "And we'd like to offer you the CEO position." Ruby didn't hesitate. "No," she said. "I already have my company." The silence on the other end was long and stunned. "Then what will you do?" he asked finally. Ruby smiled. "Build something that doesn't need a CEO to survive." Weeks passed, and Bennett Line grew into a small but trusted name. Hospitals in distant towns joined her network, one by one. "Your updates are honest," one doctor said during a call. "You never hide delays." Ruby replied with a soft laugh. "Truth saves more lives than excuses." Arya had hired 2 new dispatchers, both former North Star employees who wanted a second chance. They worked from Ruby's converted living room, now bright with screens and laughter. "You built a real team," Arya told her one afternoon. Ruby looked around. "No," she said quietly. "We built a family." Months later, Ruby received a letter in the mail, plain, unmarked, with no return address. Inside was a single page: "Thank you for not giving up when I did. Sloan." Ruby folded it gently and placed it in her drawer beside the old North Star badge. She never heard from Sloan again, but sometimes she thought about her, about how 2 women, both underestimated, had brought down an empire built on lies. Ruby didn't hate her. She understood her. They had both been trapped in someone else's vision, and both had chosen to walk away from it. One evening, as the sun set behind the Rockies, Ruby sat outside with Kayla on the porch. The mountains glowed orange, the same color she used to see through her office window but never had time to admire. "Mom," Kayla said softly, "do you miss your old job?" Ruby smiled faintly. "No, honey. I miss the woman I was before it, but I found her again." Kayla leaned her head on her shoulder. The hum of the city felt far away now, replaced by the sound of wind and birds. For the first time, Ruby wasn't running. She was home. That night, she opened her laptop one last time. The Bennett Line dashboard glowed softly on the screen. Every route showed green, no delays, no failures, just steady, quiet order. She took a screenshot and saved it under a single file name, Peace. Then she closed the computer, turned off the lights, and walked into her daughter's room. Kayla was already asleep, her violin resting beside her bed. Ruby brushed a strand of hair from her face. "We made it," she whispered. "All the way through." For once, the words weren't a promise, they were the truth. The next morning, Ruby's story traveled far beyond Denver. People called her the quiet storm, the woman who fixed chaos with calm. But Ruby didn't care about fame. She cared about the legacy she left behind, proof that integrity still had power. As she watched the sunrise spill across the mountains, she felt no anger toward those who betrayed her, only gratitude that they freed her to build something better. She turned to Kayla, smiling. "Ready for the day?" "Always," Kayla said, laughing. Ruby took her hand, whispering, "Then let's go live it." The world had finally caught up to her heart.